Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. I've got an awesome guest. I've got Lawrence Kane with me. Hi Lawrence, how are you doing?
Doing awesome. How about you?
I'm pretty good. Okay, we were just talking before recording that it took quite some effort for me to get this done in time and arrive on time back home, but everybody survived, so we're good. Um,
Yep.
so for the folks who don't know Lawrence, which is a crying shame, and where have you been hiding under a rock for the last few years? Lawrence, martial artist, author. You make me look lazy as an author because you've got I think over 20 books now. Is this your
22.
20th?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, there you go. So
But it's all relative. Lauren makes us both look bad. So,
yeah, yeah. But in our defense, he's been writing for much longer. So, but
true,
still,
true.
if we want to beat him, we're gonna have to step up our game or just keep living for a long time and write for a
Exactly.
long time. So obviously a lot of experience in martial arts, karate. You did security work for big stadiums. Is that about covering it? I know you did kind of medieval fighting style in the armor and everything as well. Do you
Yep.
still do that?
No, no, I'm way too old for that.
Oh,
But yeah, I've done everything from traditional martial arts, started in judo. I've done Aido, so the Japanese sword style. I've done the medieval European stuff. I've done close quarters combat, knife, pistol, rifle, anything under about 200 meters ish. Um, just kind of wide variety of stuff. If I'd actually stuck to any one thing, I'd probably be really good at it. But I've done just a ton of everything, and largest focus has been on karate goju.
yeah. So obviously, we mentioned books, so you've been writing for a long time, primarily with Chris Wilder. Um, how did that get started that you guys started writing together? Because I mean, I got my start like that with Lauren Christensen, that he asked me, you want to write a book together? I'm like, oh, okay. And it escalated into my own writing, but
Yeah.
what's your story?
So um, it actually started by accident. So about a year before my black belt test, I get my highest level brown belt, and Chris says he's my instructor, and he says, "Okay, you're going to test in a year, and I want you to bring a thesis to your test." I'm like, "Wow, a year thesis? Okay." So I went off and did a bunch of work, bunch of research, and so on. I show up at the test, and I've got this 140-page document, and I hand it to him, and he's like, "What the hell is this?" I'm like, "Well, it's the thesis you asked for." And he goes, "Oh, no, no, I meant like a research paper, like I don't know, like 8 pages or something." So I'm thinking, like, "Oh God, I'm an idiot." So obviously I earned my showdown. And about a month or so later, he got done reading this thing and he went, "Wow, this is really good. You got to get this published." Like, how do I do that? And he said, "I don't know, go figure it out." So, sensei says, and I did. And so I sent letters to, there was four publishers who I primarily used to source the stuff that was in the book. Sent letters to four of them, got contract offers with two, signed with one, and about a year and a half later or so, first book came out. And maybe 6 months or so after that, that first book was very unoriginally titled Martial Arts Instruction. My worst book, but also my first. Some good valuable stuff in there if you're a martial arts instructor, but it just, like I didn't know how to write nearly like I can now. And so about 6 months after it'd been out, my publisher calls me up and goes, "So what's your next book?" I'm like, "Next book? I didn't even plan on the first one." But I'd been doing a lot of this practical application of kata stuff, kind of like Ian Abernathy does in Chris's training, sort of different path, very similar approaches. And I went to Chris and I said, "Hey, I've got this idea. What if we write about how to decipher kata? Because everybody thinks it's like dancing around in your underwear, and it's actually learning how to beat the living tar out of people." And it works because it transcends language and time and culture, and like people don't understand that. And he's like, "Well, that sounds kind of interesting. Why don't you write it?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm not qualified. Like, this is all stuff I learned from you. Let's collaborate." And we did. And like almost every one of our books has been a collaboration between the two of us. I've written with some other folks, a couple independent ones, but mostly it was really just very synergistic. We have complementary styles and personalities, and we've actually got it down to this approach where we do at least one book a year, sometimes two. And so we'll kind of have this pitch meeting, and he'll come in, and he's more the idea guy. And he'll come in and he'll throw some ideas at me, kind of like you would in Hollywood, like to pitch a film. And I'll go, yeah, I don't know about that. Or, like, oh, wow, that sounds cool. And so, we kind of get down to what's this thing going to be. And, like the latest one, which, well, here, just shameless plug. Okay. Let's see if I can make that.
It's not showing up with the background thing. So the martial arts in your life, the story.
Okay. All right. Pretend there's a, you can't see it, but there's a book here. All right. So much for the shameless plug. But anyway, it's called Martial Arts in Your Life.
Yeah. I'll put a link to in the show notes, to a direct link to where you can get the book for everybody. So check out the show notes.
And you're in it, by the way. So the pitch on this one was, we've had over 20 something years, all kinds of conversations that ended in, well, martial arts are special, or martial artists are unique, or some comment about how martial artists are different. And he goes, we should actually figure out how and why and what it means. And like let's do a survey. Let's get people all around the world and question, what do they do? Why do they do it? What does it mean? And see what we come up with. And I'm like, oh, come on, somebody's done that before. And he goes, I'm pretty sure they haven't. And he's right. Nobody's ever done that before. And it's kind of shocked me, to be honest. But it led to this international survey where we actually have facts and data, along with just wonderful stories from participants, both folks we highlight where you see the whole thing, as well as aggregated stories where we take kind of common themes from multiple folks, and really definitively have come up with, martial artists really are different, generally in a good way. And it gives results where, if you want to be a martial artist, it tells you how to do it effectively. If you want to teach martial artists, it helps you connect with your audience better. If you want to find really great employees and you're, like a hiring manager, why maybe you should really consider martial artists. And which is almost ironic, because a lot of martial artists don't talk about what we do. It's like we think it's, this thing that would be, counterculture or something. Yet there's all kinds of Olympic games that feature martial arts. And so it's actually, I think, more mainstream than a lot of folks realize, and much more common than a lot of folks realize. But it also has benefits that I think all of us know intuitively, but never really could articulate before. And now we have.
And I mean, and again, like you just said, so Chris contacted me and asked if I wanted to participate in the survey, obviously, which I did. It was very interesting for me, because I typically always refuse to do surveys because it's usually a bunch of nonsense, or it's like, okay, what do I get out of it? Like, nothing. But this one was really interesting, also very well crafted. So that was my first question I wanted to ask you, Lawrence. How do you guys go about creating that survey, selecting questions, making sure it's balanced and or that it doesn't end up being, selection bias because of the questions? How did you guys put it together?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of subjective things and a little bit of objective things. We had a bunch of theories going in, and wanted to either prove or disprove them. And it's relatively scientific. I actually work for an aerospace company in real life, and I work with mathematicians and data analysts and folk. In fact, the guy who invented what we call big data, the whole analytics profession back in 1953, was one of my coworkers. He's retired a couple of years ago. So I understand how to do a scientifically based survey, but I wanted to make it a little bit more fun and not stuffy, right? So we kind of balanced empirical things like Myers-Briggs type indicator personality types, with more subjective things like, would you rather go to the beach or go to the mountains if you're on vacation? But there's reasons why every one of those questions was in there. And I think at least hopefully folks didn't realize why the questions were there. But the results were just fascinating. I mean, some of it was like exactly what we expected. For example, martial artists study violence, but they don't become violent through the study. Kind of knew that going in. Now we got proof. Other things were just surprising, like are you an early bird or a late owl? And what does that mean? And how does that compare to the rest of society? And so it was all ultimately trying to be as empirical as we could, but still fun and not so many questions people wouldn't do it. I mean, there's a few questions I really wanted to put in there, but I just figured it was either too complicated to explain or it would be too much work for people to answer. And so we just left it out.
Yeah. All right. Could you give examples of that?
Oh, sure. So, well, you used to compete at a very high level, and you taught folks who competed at a very high level. And there's a Japanese concept called Zanshin or continuing mind, and I'm sure I pronounced it wrong. One of my instructors says I speak Japanese with a Mexican accent, and that's not a compliment. But the concept is it's like being in the flow state, maybe for a Western vernacular, right? And it's something when I've been in tournaments, when I've been in real fights, every so often it comes on, and it's like for those who are starters, it's like being a Jedi. Like what the other guy's going to do before they do it. It's amazing, and you almost can't lose. Like things slow down, you know exactly what's going on around you, all the little micro things that give you the sensation of what to go do and how to respond. It's all there, right? I've personally never been able to just turn that on and off. It just sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. So I wanted to ask folks, like, does this, do you experience this? Is it on demand or is it just sometimes? But just explaining what it even is, I couldn't really figure out a way to do that question, right? But I mean, just for you, like, is that something, have you experienced that? Is it something you can turn on and off, or is it just sometimes happens?
Yeah, I've experienced it multiple times. Can't turn it on and off. What I have noticed is that focus, obviously, concentration, mindset plays a huge role. Context, but still, there's a lot of seemingly contradictions in my experiences. For instance, there's one time where it literally looks like a Jedi trick. I was standing in a locker room with a client, and he likes to tease me, and I was facing the locker. He's behind me. I turn around and pick up my leg, and I block his incoming kick. I didn't see it. I didn't hear it. I don't know why. It was timed perfectly. But could it be like freak coincidence? Sure, I'll take that explanation. But that happened, and I know that he likes to punch me or kick me when I'm not looking, and have like a gotcha moment. And all in good fun and in play. But so it's not like I had zero knowledge that this might happen, but just at the right time, the right technique, the right defensive move on my part. So that's one aspect. The other thing is that I had that once in competition, and that was pretty much when I was getting close to the peak of my, athletic performance at that time. I had a preparation fight for the World Championships, and the guy, basically my opponent, he'd been partying all night, and I was like, and I knew the guy, and before the fight, we actually talked a little bit. Like, are you okay? No, I went out and this and that. What the hell did you do that? Anyway, and I was pissed because like this was supposed to be, a preparation for a very important competition for me. So we started fighting, and at one point, everything just clicked, and I could, just like you explained, I was basically, doing whatever I wanted, throw combinations that normally wouldn't be able to do a lot of, funky stuff that normally people are like, whoa, what is he doing? And it lands. And at one point, I'd do something and I'd move out of the way of his punch that apparently, I felt was coming, and it was the right defensive move against his punch. And everything just clicked. And at one point, it's just that he gets totally overwhelmed for 5-6 seconds, that everything I do lands, everything he does is useless. And that was pretty much near the end of the fight. It was by far not a perfect fight, obviously, but this kind of time frame where it was all flowing. And there's a bunch more stories like that.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's jumping the OODA loop, right? You observe, orient, decide, act, and somewhere between, the decide and act on the other guy's part, you've already responded, and yeah, it's almost like magic. And I really wish I could do it on demand. I can't, but I've had that happen a few times. And there was a tournament I went to years and years ago. One of the first times that it really just everything clicked for me. And the guy I fought in the finals was better than me, and he'd been better than me. He'd been training about 3 years longer. We both knew he was going to win, because that's what happened every time we ended up in the finals, right? He wins and I'm second. And I fed him his lunch, man. It was like he didn't even land a blow. It was amazing. And afterwards he's like, "Oh, you got lucky," And I'm like, no, I just had a really good day. And he goes, "No, we're gonna, just unofficially, we're gonna have a rematch." All right, fine. And we were gonna go 2 out of 3, and ended up being 3 out of 5. And finally, when I beat him 5 times in a row, he gave up. I could never do that again, probably. But just that day, like everything was on. I knew it was like I was in his head. I mean, he even said at one point, he goes like, "Get out of my head." And it was, but it was amazing. But what that says is, you go back and you read the stories of the samurai and their duels, and and sometimes they kind of face off and they look at each other, and one guy just bow out.
Yeah.
And it's almost this, it's been kind of mystified in some ways, or legendized, or whatever, to make up a word, but there's a real component to it. And I've found that in folks who are at the top of their game, not just in athletic competitions, but in other things as well. Folks who are kind of weird example, but this guy in a finance organization I work with could do stuff with spreadsheets, and somehow it was almost like mystical, the way he like you'd see him at his computer, and it was almost like he was one with the machine or whatever, but he'd come up with stuff that he could explain these really complex, multifunctional things that most people couldn't understand, and he could boil it down to simple, common, everyday, like, because of these 27 things, this happens, therefore we do that. I'm like, how did you do that? And I think it's the same energy, the same kind of, brain function or whatever, but I don't really know. But anyway, that's just one of those areas, like, I'd love to understand more of, like, how does it work? Why does it work? When does it work? Is there some way you can turn it on more when you want? But yeah, that was just way too complex to go into the book.
Yeah. And would have been interesting, though, because I would have loved to hear the answers from other people. I'm sure there would be a truckload of stories like this, where people have, like, like you said, this kind of flow state, or whatever you want to call it, where everything just works out perfectly. Well, there might be time to write a sequel or do a second survey. Who knows?
Well, that is true. Yeah, it's you never know. We could do a follow up, although this thing is like, what is it, like 500? It's close to 500 pages, I think. 441 plus the front matter. So it's a big book.
Yeah.
So if we added too much more, I don't know. R2 could be, I mean, it could substitute for body armor or something.
Is there anything in the book that, when it comes to the questionnaire, that was like the biggest surprise, that you're like, I never saw this one coming?
Actually, one of them, and I kind of hinted about it earlier, is the whole, would you rather go to the beach or the mountains? That I kind of thought was a throwaway question, to be honest. It was just, because there's surveys that look at that, but the results were so unique for martial artists, like almost the exact opposite of the rest of the population. It was kind of like, wow, that was actually pretty meaningful. And there's a few others like that. Same thing with whether, an early bird or a late owl, some of the Myers-Briggs personality type stuff, just things where, you have the normal population and you have martial artists, and they're completely different. And it was surprising. So some things an expected example is we looked at somatotype, or however you pronounce that, which is your body type. And is that correlated to your ability to do well in martial arts, or to what martial art you resonate with? Like if you're, like you or Chris, you're a big stocky dude, do you tend to move towards more wrestling versus someone who's thinner and more wiry like me? Do you tend to move towards striking arts or weapons form or something? Didn't really find a correlation between your body type and what you're successful in. In other words, anybody could be a martial artist and be successful. It's more around the passion for it, finding a good instructor. We talked about I've all the different things I've tried. The reason I stayed with Goju-Ryu as long as I did is because Chris is a great instructor, and I can learn stuff from him that I was never able to from other folks. And just simple, stupid things like, so if I make a straight fist, you can see with my right hand, it looks correct, right? I do it with my left hand, and my there we go. And the thing, you notice it's a little bit of an angle. Like, okay, so what, right? Well, the first guy I took a karate class from freaked out because I couldn't make the fist exactly correctly, because when my wrist was straight, the angle of my hand was slightly off. Yeah. And it's like, well, that's the way my bones are set. Like if I bend my wrist and then I hit something with it, it hurts. So I need to have a straight wrist. And he like freaked out. I mean, like literal. Now this was at University of Washington, and the Intramural Association, and clearly the guy was not a great instructor. He was a college professor who taught on the side. But that's an example of somebody who was a horrible instructor. My judo instructor is the highest ranking black belt in the United States at the time. He's the guy who kind of founded judo in America, and like anybody who ever took judo up until maybe 2000 or so knows who he is. But he taught Japanese style. Like he never explained anything. And so, I had a lot of like, no, do it again. No, do it again. It's like, but I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And so it like, amazingly skilled practitioner, great guy, loved him, but I didn't learn nearly as fast from him as I did. I took a week-long workshop that was taught by the Canadian Olympic judo coach. I learned more in that week than I had in like 4 years previously, because that guy knew how to teach to your learning style. It's actually one of the reasons I did my first book the way I did, was around teaching, because it resonated with me that, it's not really what you study so much as who you study it from, and that they connect with you as a student. Because, let's face it, most martial arts have a lot of common elements to them. There's uniquenesses, but, pretty much everything has, striking, grappling, throwing, emphasis changes, right? But there's the same kind of fundamental building bricks. And so if you really get somebody who can teach you to the way you learn, that's what really matters. And again, reinforced, my experience is now reinforced with evidence from what other people have provided in the book.
Yeah. And something else, this is just, some of the questions were to me surprising when I answered the survey. Like, okay, where's this going? So some of them, like, were obviously expected, like, how is there rank in your system? How does it work? Yeah. How many styles have you done? And so that makes sense from my perspective, as it's you get a better view of what your population that is in your survey is actually doing, and so that makes perfect sense. But there was
kind of demographic information.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, some of the stuff is more I don't know, how did you phrase it? Not necessarily as much hard data, but a little bit more like testing the waters and so on. And there was one that I really liked, and I'm looking at it here. What is one thing, big or small, that you are truly bad at? Yeah. Because I love that question, because so many people deify their martial arts teacher, put him on a pedestal, and think that he can do nothing wrong. I'm like, that's not how it works. We're all flawed human beings. So is there anything in there that the way that people answered that you're like, okay, I really like this example is a really good one?
Oh yeah, it was interesting. Some people took that question really seriously and had pretty deep answers, and other people, somebody said, I'm tone deaf. I can't play music. Okay, well, Interesting, but not great, right? But there's other folks who, they are amazing at martial arts. They've got, for example, unbelievable proprioception. But there's other aspects, other elements of the life that they're just not good at. One of the I don't think it was one of the ones we featured, but one of the stories. So one of the interesting things is the way we gathered the data is if it was something that went in, very empirical, we'd go into a chart. If it was something that was more subjective, the stories went out and we go into a word cloud. And so we could sort of highlight and look at common themes. And so we not only read every single thing in there, but we were also looking for common themes. And one of the stories that the guy came up with was, kind of long story short, was not very good at math, not very good at reading. Turned out, way before folks really understood in the education system, there was a learning disability, being dyslexic. And so, I felt like I was never any good at anything until I started taking martial arts, and then wow, I'm just amazing at this. But there's all these other things that I could never figure out. And it was a pretty interesting perspective, because you're right. We see our instructors as, almost like we almost deify them in some ways, right? That they can do no wrong. They're, and we think just because you can really hit hard, or you can throw well or grapple or whatever it is, right, that you can do everything. And that's not true. I mean, we're all people, right? And we're good at some things and bad at other things. I mean, personally, I am not very athletic. I never have been. And it takes me longer to learn stuff than it does people who are naturally athletic. On the other hand, I actually understand it a lot better, because once I understand it, I get nuance sometimes that other folks don't. And I'm probably a better teacher than people who are actually better martial artists. At least, I've had students relate that. And it just gets down to really learning style. Yeah. And, I'm somebody who really, I can understand big picture, small details simultaneously. And so I can really think things through from sort of a, cerebral perspective. But when it comes to having really good hand-eye coordination and, and being able to move with real quickness and power and things like that, it takes me a lot longer to get there. It's not that I can't do it. It's just not natural. It's harder. But on the other hand, because I understand the benefits of it, I never quit. And, it's old, what a black belt is a white belt who never gave up. Well, hello.
That's true. And that's like you just said, I really like this question a lot in the survey, because this is one of my pet peeves. I don't know why, but I've had it for a long time. And it's just as this deification of martial arts teachers. I'm totally against that. You can respect somebody, you can look up to your teacher, that's all fine, obviously. But this idea of them being these perfect human beings that can do no wrong, there are way too many assholes who are really good martial artists and teachers.
Yeah.
Who are, extremely good, but they're just not very good people. And they don't deserve that pedestal. And that includes me, by the way. I'm a very much a flawed human being. And I know myself. So I'm I don't want anybody putting me on a pedestal. So I try to write and talk about these topics in a way that I've noticed that a lot of other martial artists don't do. So I'll talk about my injuries. I'll talk about, my stupid mistakes, the times that I've been wrong, and so on. And I think that's, it's 2022, we should be able to get over ourselves a little bit, especially as we get older, and just talk about real life, as opposed to just no, I did that perfect high kick then, and you should have seen it. It was a thing of beauty.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I think that, one of the reasons why sometimes folks are afraid to get started in martial arts is they see it as almost this magic, they see Chuck Norris or Bruce Lee or something in a movie and go, I could never do that, and yet it's it's something that's, and like I said, we have facts and data, right? Anybody can be a successful martial artist if they have a good instructor and follow the plan. And, it just takes some people longer than others. But the instructor themselves is a person just like anybody else. And it's just like the CEO of a company, right? Sometimes when I first started working years and years ago, I've been at an aerospace giant for maybe 2.5 years, 3 years, not even that, probably 2.5 years. And I was doing some audit work, and I went in and was meeting with the licensed transportation department and going through some invoices and stuff. And in walks the CEO. And this is, way back in the days, suit, tie, immaculate, this guy was the head of the, I think it was the 15th at the time, maybe 17th, something like that, largest company in the world. And he walks in, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's Frank Schranz. Wow. And so he came over, and the guy I was working with was his personal driver. And he goes, what are you doing right now? And his driver's like, well, that meeting got canceled, so pretty much nothing. Like, I'm helping this guy, with this audit. What do you need? And he looks over at me and he says, well, what are you doing now? And whatever you want. Like, I work for you. I mean, here I'm a kid. I'm kind of freaking out. And he goes, all right, come on, we're going to breakfast. And he took there's a place it was called Randy's Diner. It's kind of like a Denny's, if those who recognize what Denny's is. And he took us to breakfast and just chatted about what's it like to be an employee in this giant corporation.
Yeah.
And, here I am, that it's like having dinner with the president of a country or something. I mean, it was just a little overwhelming. And in retrospect, I wish I'd been a little more confident to ask more questions, but I was more worried about like spilling food on myself and whatever, but he was just a normal guy. Now you see him in the boardroom, totally different story. I mean, in the boardroom when he was on, okay, there's the CEO, but at breakfast, just a guy having breakfast and chatting. And it was really illuminating for me and very, very cool in a lot of ways. And it was interesting because I've gotten to know many of the CEOs. Actually, I do pretty good work, and I get awarded a lot of recognition, and sometimes it comes from the top. So I've met many of them, and one of them was saying he'd gotten out of his car to go walk into some meeting and stepped in a mud puddle. And so as the meeting's starting, he made a kind of an offhand joke about how because his pant leg was all wet and he was kind of embarrassed. Well, the next day they repaved the parking lot. And he was like, well, I wasn't like, I was just making a joke because I was embarrassed. I didn't want, that you guys spent like $30,000 to go repave a parking lot. So, there's that awareness of, if you're the guy in charge, you got to be really careful what you say and how it might be misinterpreted, because people were thinking like, oh my God, the CEO is upset and we need to repave the parking, right? And he was like, well, my pant leg's wet and muddy and I'm embarrassed. Same thing goes if you're a martial arts instructor, right? You can have that same view of like the CEO, where you say something and people go off, it's like Chris told me to go write a thesis. So I wrote a 140-page thesis, right?
That's on Chris, because he should have said like, write me like a 10-page report or something.
I mean, he should have, but that's okay. I mean, it worked out well in the end. So, sure. But I mean, the point is that even though I'm friends with Chris, I still have this, like, he's my instructor, and or Lauren or you or any. I mean, I hang out with some really amazing people, and but sometimes you got to remember that they're people too, and they're not just this amazing set of accomplishments, right? Yeah. And that's part of the reason we had questions like that in there. The what words would others use to describe you? What's something you're trying to make a habit? What's something that you're bad at? That's the reason where some of those questions came from, was to try to make this more human. Because again, if we wrote a book that was a whole bunch of facts and data and charts and stuff, we'd put everybody to sleep, right? We wanted cool stories and takeaways people can use for stuff. And so that made it, I think, made the folks more interesting. That the folks that we profiled, you get to see them a little bit with a subset of some of the questions that we thought were interesting, and take away, actual usable stuff instead of just, a bunch of boring data.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, for the folks listening or watching us on YouTube, here's the thing. Like I said in the beginning, I really don't like surveys. They're typically boring. This is far from boring. Like you just said, you could have made it just about the data, and that would have been, in my opinion, likely very, very boring. You guys took it a totally different route. I think the really good thing that you guys do is, like you said, you've got the question, then you explain what the data gave back to you guys. Then there's profiles of people, which are basically interviews. So there's this good switch between the one and the other going on. But and this is the other question that I wanted to ask you about, because I was like, I want to know what these guys were thinking, and so that the listener or the viewer, so that you understand that this is not a boring book to read by far. So here's a question that I'm like, okay, which one of your senses are you most willing to sacrifice? Okay, so how did you guys come up with that question? What was the point?
So that one was, as humans, we tend to be very visual, right?
Yeah.
The senses work differently, and we actually have there's a lot of depth in that chapter that talks about, what the different senses are, what they mean, which ones are developed earlier and later, what it might say about you and things like that. But the reason for that question was, we wanted to see if there's something different in the way martial artists think about disability than the way the normal population or regular everyday folks think about disability. And so kind of saying, what were you willing to give up is one way of getting at that we could actually map back against data that existed. That's one of the challenges, is a lot of the questions we wanted to ask, we also wanted to have a baseline reference and not have to interview like 10,000, non-martial artists too. And so we tied a lot of these questions to surveys that we found done in various places. I mean, some of are very academic, through colleges and whatnot. Some are like the, USA Today straw poll sort of thing. And so we wanted to be able to tie these things back to the baseline and see what was different. And so that was just really one of those, we had something to compare it to, and we thought it would be an interesting answer. And it actually turned out to be more interesting than I expected. Some of these questions, to be perfectly honest, we didn't know what we'd get back. And we weren't even sure we were going to include them in the book when we got done. Actually, every question we asked, we included in the book, because we found interesting stuff with all of them. But there was a little bit of the way we characterized it, where some of them, and you can probably guess which ones they are. Some of them were very, we had a theory and we wanted to either prove or disprove the theory. Others were just like, this could be kind of interesting. Let's see what happens. And it turns out we did a pretty good job, or the folks we sent it to did a pretty good job, or something in there, right? Because they all ended up being very interesting to us. And even like the folks we highlighted, right? It was not based on who they were. There's a couple of Hall of Fame members who didn't get highlighted in here because their answers weren't as interesting as other people who folks have maybe never heard of. So it's all about, we actually we literally took the names off and looked at the most interesting answers and then decided who we were going to highlight. And so we just, we really wanted to make this something that was approachable and something that folks would really, it would resonate with them and they could use it for something, as opposed to just, us having fun. And I mean, I don't think it's obvious to anybody. I'm sure it is to you because you've written a lot of books, but writing a book is hard. For every book you publish, you probably write it 7 to 10 times because all the rewrites and everything. Well, when you're having to herd, hundreds of martial artists and get them to actually follow directions, and I mean, the amount of work this thing was insane. I mean, like halfway through, we're looking at each other going, I think we're nuts. Like, this is never going to work. But it worked. And it's really a credit to the folks who participated. And but yeah, I will say one takeaway that's not listed in here: martial artists are really bad at following directions.
I could have told you that.
Yeah, well,
Here's the thing. I mean, you've touched upon it throughout the us talking today. But I'd like to talk a little bit about, who would benefit the most or find this book the most interesting. For me, that would be pretty much anybody involved in martial arts, combat sports, and so on, for a variety of reasons. So the first reason is that you get to read the thoughts, some of them pretty intimate, from folks who have, in many cases, for the reader, like decades more, or maybe half a lifetime more experience than you do. There's people in there that have
yeah,
been training for much longer than I have, and I've been training for 35 plus years. So that's like, you can see in some way what is on the path for you in the future. Like, you might have very similar thoughts, or this might be information
yeah,
that you can find useful. Like you mentioned, for teachers, I think this is going to be very valuable, because there's a lot of information there. Okay, this is the path of so many people who stuck with the art for a long time. What can I learn from this so that I can have my students stay involved with the art that I love to teach
yeah,
for an equal amount of time? Which, in my opinion, shouldn't that be the goal as a teacher? That you don't
yeah,
have like 50,000 students, but you have maybe like 500 who do it for a lifetime, as opposed to 15,000 for a month, and the rest a few years. So in that regard, I think it's going to be eye-opening. Like, one of the questions that you ask is like, would you do it again, or what advice would you give yourself, and so on. I think those questions give a lot of data for instructors as well. And the other one is just that, if you are a spouse to a serious martial artist, maybe you want to read this, because then you'll notice that, okay, my guy or my girl is not the only crazy nutcase out there who's into this. Okay, there's a bunch of other people, and it's okay. It's fine.
I hadn't even thought of that demographic. You're right. Yeah, it's a um, should have talked to you before we wrote the back cover, man. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. That's very true. And by the way, we define martial arts by the actual definition, which some folks only think of, karate or MMA or boxing or whatever. It's any system or tradition of combat for competition, cultural heritage, spiritual development, self-defense, military, law enforcement. So it's pretty broad, right? And we actually highlight at the beginning of the book those things that made it into the Olympic Games, which folks know about, I imagine. But it's martial arts are actually it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's huge. I mean, way bigger than I actually realized when we started writing this. And depending on how you define it, and we've got information in the book that gets into details, but depending on how you define it, we've also articulated like what the most popular arts are, kind of the size of the industry and things like that. So yeah, if you have any interest in it at all, it's something that can be really quite illuminating. And we're really, really appreciative of all the folks who participated, because we not only had folks fill out questionnaires, but a few of them we actually called them up and asked more questions, and really wanted to understand, and kind of came at this with just an inquisitive, I'm interested, let's make this interesting, for others kind of perspective. And it was really, like I said earlier, a lot of stuff was substantiated by, our theories were substantiated. Others were not. It was just completely different than we expected. And so, I actually learned probably more from doing this book than any of the other ones that I've written. And, just the research that we do on these things can take months, right?
Yeah.
I learned something with every book I do, but man, it's, I just found it neat.
True. And like I said, for the reasons I mentioned, I think a lot of people can benefit from reading this.
Yeah.
So I think we've pretty much covered most of the ground. So I'm going to put a direct link in the show notes. So if you read the description of the podcast episode, wherever you're listening to it, there's going to be a link there. It's going to be at winsblog.com, and then the number of the episode, which I don't know right now by heart when it will be, because we've got a few other things scheduled. If you watch it on YouTube, there's going to be a link in the description. Lawrence, are you still good for time for doing a bonus episode, or how's things
Sure.
going?
Yeah, I can be here for another, what do you got? About 11 minutes.
Okay, that's excellent. So Lawrence and I are going to continue for the bonus episode on my Patreon, in which he will answer the questions from my patrons. I am going to say goodbye to everybody else. Lawrence, where can people reach you? What's the best place to follow you, find your work, and so on?
Well, there's several places. If you're just interested in the books, go on to Amazon and just type Lawrence A. Kane. I'm not the Zodiac killer suspect. That's a different guy. But it's Kane, and you can find all my my author page and all my stuff on there. If you want to get directly to Chris and I, stickmanpublications.com. And you could directly email me at lakane@ix.netcom.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. So I'm pretty easy to find. Just Google and find a guy who's not the serial killer suspect.
Okay, and to be sure, again, I'll put direct links in the show notes on my blog for this episode, so people can easily find that.
Awesome.
All right. Anything else you want to mention in parting?
No, just appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
My pleasure.
Hail, great Satan of chocolate. Get that one in there.
I'll explain that in the bonus segment on Patreon.
There you go.
Folks, thanks for listening. As always, like, share, subscribe, let everybody know. You can join me on Patreon if you want to support the show and get access to the bonus episodes. And if not, I'll talk to you next time. Okay, bye, everybody.